attending an intellectual adventure of the mind, the cognitive evolution of our civilization. Please note that we are recording this program. I'm Melanie Rubin, Director of Senior and Adult Programs for the Lawrence Family Jewish Community Center, Jacobs Family Campus, and we are excited to feature one of our very own JCC members today, Bar-Giora Goldberg. He also happens to be a scholar, entrepreneur, and author of The Mind is Mightier, Reflections on the Historic Rise of Cognition and Complexity. We'll be taking questions at the end, and you're welcome to put them in the chat or raise your hand, and we'll ask you to unmute yourself when we call on you when it's time. Bar-Giora, I turn it over to you to tell us a little bit more about yourself. Thank you.
Super. So my name is Bar-Giora Goldberg. Bar-Giora is an Israeli Hebrew name. I spent half of my life over there. That's where I got all my education. And I'm actually a high-tech engineer. I graduated from Technion in electronics. And in the States, my career was mostly entrepreneurial. I co-founded 2 companies, one that was in communications and digital, and one in imaging. So we made actually a camera. And luckily, beyond the math, which I obviously have a certain aptitude for, I also have a passion for history and for especially music. So it's kind of a very rich life. We've been now in San Diego for about 4 years, 2 kids, 4 grandchildren. And I hope very much we have about an hour. Melanie is going to, toward the end, going to allow some questions. So we're going to stop maybe 5 minutes before 11. And it should be an interesting, hopefully a profitable hour, because I hope that all of us are going to learn something. So I'm going to move to my screen. The book actually was long in coming. There was a lot of learning that had to be done. And so this thing took about 5-6 years to write. And then you find out you didn't even start, because then you have to market it, which is a huge headache, as you can imagine, because 1.5 million books are printed every year in the United States. So how do you make yourself shine? Very difficult, but we'll see. So if you want to see a promotional, you can see on the top, themindismightier.com. And I think we can start. So there are many issues. The book is actually a history book, but rather than chronicles, like kings and queens and battles, and castles and gossip. It is more about the evolution of ideas in history. And my focus was to demonstrate in very many fields, in economy, in law, in art, in music, in basically everything, that we are moving forward on a path of rising cognition, which means we are becoming more mental. If it was very important to be Goliath 2,000 years ago with a big sword and big muscle, today it's all about cognition and smart and the successful societies. So there are societies that are studying, that are writing patents, and in fact, when you think about the fact that today the largest hotel company, Airbnb, has no properties, and the largest taxi company, Uber, doesn't have any taxis, or used not to have taxis at all before the virus. And that Facebook, the biggest social network company, doesn't have any content. I mean, we provide the content. It just tells you that it's all behind the screen. It's all about services, and about mental. So we have a short time. I will not be able to cover everything, obviously. So I chose today to make an introduction to the issue of cognition and complexity, and then focus about music, which is really my life passion. And we will kind of walk through both the evolution of music, the history of music, but also how it became very cognitive, how it became very calculated, how certain composers really stopped bothering so much about the beautiful tune, which was the center of everything until maybe 200 years ago, and started to focus more into content and development and structure. So you can see why we like Zoom, right? I mean, you can't see my feet, but maybe I am half naked here, and that's the way it is. So, I would agree that definitely lectures or face-to-face are much better. And I really love to come to the music lectures in JCC. But now we have no choice, and I think that we have to maybe a few more months to do it this way. So talking about CNC, which is cognition and complexity, I'd like to define and say what it is, kind of what I mean to do in the next hour. So cognition, we know what it is, all of us, because cognition is the mental processes, the smarts, the brain power. That's really the meaning of cognition. Complexity is much more complicated. If you look at the dictionary or on the web at complexity, you will see that there are very, very many definitions. And the fact, I think, is that we think that we know what complexity is, like we know what beauty is, but it's very tough to define it. So over the many years, I found one definition that I liked a lot and that I copied here, that complexity of a system is measured by how difficult it is to project its future. So, for example, the weather, very, very, very complex. So complexity always has to do with system. And systems are, the universe is a system, the social order is a system, the nation is a system. Part of all that is that we today really live in what I call the cognitive cloud. The cognitive cloud is, to give you some idea what I mean with it, it's kind of the combination of all the mental activities that we're involved in. Maybe what Hegel used to call Zeitgeist, so the spirit of the time. But today, really, we're at the age of ideas. I mean, I just yesterday saw a new possible vehicle for the future, which is basically looks like levitating on air. I'm not sure what technology they're using, but going to the third dimension, because we have so much density on the roads today that we have to start to think about. And maybe the technology has come to it. Obviously, such a vehicle cannot be, even though it's moving very, very slowly, it cannot be driven by people. It has to be all computerized to make sure we don't bump into one another. And in fact, I'm sure that the computer today is driving much better than we do, but there are other reasons why the regulator will not allow computers to drive already. So some of the big issues that we are facing, in my opinion, both in philosophy and in science, is the issue of consciousness. What exactly is consciousness? It's not something that we know. And in fact, it looks like every piece of living matter, from the amoeba to the chimpanzee, has a certain level of consciousness. Maybe not like ours, because we are conscious about being conscious, and maybe they are not. But consciousness is the big issue, and maybe we can never really find exactly what it is. It could be a feature of the DNA. Who knows? The other big issue that faces us, not in modernity, but always, is purpose. What are we doing here? And that, of course, is very philosophical. I think that most of us thought about it a lot during our lives. And I would say that if there is a solution, it has to be social. I don't think that we can think about the purpose for the individual. And in fact, many philosophers, if you look at the graph on the side of the screen, this omega point is something that was developed by the French philosopher Teilhard de Chardin, who you might know. He was kind of a cult leader in the 50s after he died. He was a Jesuit, but also a Darwinist. You can imagine the trouble he had with the church. They eventually exiled him to China. But he came up with this, total humanity is eventually converging to an omega point, omega being the last letter of the Greek alphabet. I think that what he really meant was everybody will eventually integrate into the Christ, but if you read his book, God is never mentioned. So he was very careful. And he looked at the omega point as something that has a pull. It's not only that we are all converging into being this big brain, the human brain together, but he thought that there's some mystical point. Well, on the other hand, if you look at Epicurus, he thought that the totality of our life is really to enjoy ourselves, pain and pleasure. And after so many years, we depart, and we hope the next generation is continuing. So to talk a little bit more about the CNC, Protagoras, about 2,600 years ago, coined the incredible concept that man is the measure of everything. Because most of humanity then thought that the gods are everything. Everything is in the gods. But the Greeks, who really invented everything in Western civilization, they came up with this idea, and we don't know exactly what he meant. But for us, it means that we really, our thinking, our world, this is a human world today that we created. We took over the planet, and now we are doing a pretty good job of destroying it. And everything is really depending on our will and our plans and the way we act. We really live in a world of make-believe, which is totally the product of our consciousness. If you think about everything that you are in, except for this table, which is this physical world, we live in a totally cognitive universe. We'll talk about it a little bit in the next slide. Civilization, in my opinion, is actually anti-Darwinian, because Darwinism, which is the paradigm of science today, says that the strong will eat the weak. That's really what it is. And in fact, that's what we see in nature. But civilization is the opposite, in my opinion. So we help the weak, we cure the sick, we do everything possible to equalize, what is not born to be equal. We are all with different beauty and smart and power, and civilization is again. So it's a kind of a great conundrum. What exactly does it mean that civilization, the center pillar of our being, is anti-Darwinian? So is Darwinism in question, which I think it is? If you look at human evolution in the last 10,000 years since we created civilization, it's not Darwinian anymore. We didn't change that much, but take a look at what we achieved. Right? In the last 40 years, we increased the density of computer chips by 10 to the power 15, which is a number that nobody can imagine. We can write it down. It's like a million, 2.5 times. A billion times million times thousand. and that's just in 40 years. It's not Darwinian. So the other thing is, my focus on the rise of complexity. And I think, again, the last example I gave, absolutely imagine designing a chip that has 500 million chips on it, transistors on it. How complicated it is. In fact, so complicated, we can't do it anymore. Computers have to do it. And in art, if you look at the way we started to paint 50,000 years ago in caves, the idea was to create a very accurate representation of reality. So placing the real world, which is 3D, on a two-dimension surface. And that improved eventually during the Renaissance in the 15th century. We understood that we can do a much better job by adding also perspective. So now we could really represent the 3D world. If you look like at the Byzantine painting, they're very flat because they didn't use perspective and everything was just on 2 dimensions. But now we know how to do much better. And so, but still, the quality of the painting, Raphael, Leonardo, whoever it was, Piero della Francesca, was on the accuracy, the hand of the painter, the accuracy of the paint. But that changed. And we started to be much more abstract. So in the 19th century, Impressionism was not anymore the accurate representation of the world. There's actually no face. And so we had to start to use our own imagination to interpret the picture, the painting. And of course, then we invented photography. We really don't need anymore to paint every millimeter on Melanie's face. It's enough to do other things. And painting or music or literature became very, very abstract. So now, when you look at a Guernica or you look at a Jackson Pollock, you have to interpret it. What the hell does this mean? Because obviously it's very mental. It's not anymore wonderful hand. The wonderful hand does not make a great painter today anymore. It has to be an intellectual, has to be some depth to the art. And the same with music. I don't have to tell you what's happening with modern music. We're going to go to the detail a little bit in the second part of the presentation. Music became very abstract. Many of us don't understand what's happening in the last 100 years. It's not only in the last 20 years. Stravinsky is not easy, Prokofiev is not easy, Barkut is not easy. You have to work it to enjoy them. And then, to find the other dimensions of the music, but it's not anymore the beautiful tune that calms us down. When we have fantastic composers who did it, right? I mean, who compares to Mozart with this magnificent, elongated, sweet melodies? But apparently there's more to it, and we're not talking about it. And then, the social order, the complexity of the economy today. I'm just thinking about, my sister is now listening, and our father was a very smart man, and he knew nothing about finance. I mean, nothing. The little money that he had was in a saving account. To make us happy, he used to show us the account and tell us that the number of the account is how many liras he has in it, to make us feel better. But he had no clue about investing, about the instrument, about what's happening. One generation later, his son, pretty well understanding what's happening in the stock market and what's going on in the world economy. And, maybe not an expert, but understanding the terms, what is the meaning of the speed of money, or crime rate or things like that, is just one generation. So really anybody who is involved, and I hope that all of you are involved in somehow in your 401 plan in investing, have to understand what is happening there. You can't trust the experts because the experts that are saving us know very little, they know less than us. So, and then think about the complexity of food production, not only manufacturing, but deliverance and making sure that everything is safe. I mean, nation of 300 million people, we eat out a lot outside and there's not that any problem. Think about it. It's true that our body is capable, but beyond it, think about what's happening with all the refrigerators are traveling the country and everything is working pretty well. So I'd like to say another word about the make-believe, because I think it's central to my thinking. We really live in a world that is totally mental now. So religion, gods, mythologies, the social strata, right? I mean, the United States was born as a classless society. But in England, there is a very strict strata, and the majority of the people obeyed it. They accept the fact that the queen of the royal family, that in my opinion, have done nothing really, and actually have really no authority beyond the symbol, are beyond them, are beyond them. And you have complete newsletters and press in England that is dedicated to the gossip and the bullshit of this family, but people accept it as, and the queen is this apolitical symbol of the nation. Money, it's totally invention of our mind. Think about it. If 10,000 years ago, people used to exchange properties by bartering. So, I have chicken and you have potatoes, we change them. It didn't work well, it couldn't work well because it's so clumsy. There was no standard for value. And then about 5,000 years ago, the concept of money was invented and running the world. I'm still amazed the fact that with a $20 bill that is worthless, I can go to the grocery store and come home with a bunch of fruits and chapter. It's all symbols. It's all symbols. I mean, the piece of paper has value because the state stands there. And the state said, this piece of paper is actually a unit of debt, and we are going to pay that debt. That's really what it is. Money that we are using is units of debt. And then in science today, when you think about what's happening, I've taken a seminar in cosmology in the last year. It's all what happened in the last 20 years. Cosmology is a science of 5,000 years. People looked at the stars. The Greeks already knew about the planets and the difference between the planets and stars. And then Kepler and Galileo and Newton. No, you don't hear any of this. It's all in the last 20 years because suddenly we found out that the universe is not only expanding, but it's accelerating. The picture in the background is, of course, the temperature of the microwave background noise. And now we have to reinvent a new science because we don't know how to deal with it. Terms like black energy and black matter are 20 years old. They didn't exist before. So we can never go back to the Big Bang if you believe that really everything started from this point, from this infinitesimal point that contained all what we see now. We can never go back. It's all models in our mind, and it's wonderful. But the whole economy, the whole real world is also a model for us. Okay, I'm starting to be short in time, so I'm going to give it up, and I'm going to, as I said, I'm going to take the model for my theory in music and show how music evolved, how music it developed into a much more cognitive, mental phenomena. And so sound, music is sound in time. I think that's probably the best definition. And theoretically, we can hear from 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz. I think that most of us don't hear beyond 8 kilohertz. And in fact, the majority of the contents of music is anywhere between 60 hertz to about 4 kilohertz. I can tell you that, like my dad, I lost my hearing. I've been using now a hearing aid for more than 10 years. And I have no problem going to the concert or the opera without hearing all that extra sound that probably is above 3 kilohertz. And it's fine. So on the piano, the range is about 7 octaves. So an octave is 12 notes. 7 octaves, the piano is usually 84 keys. And in fact, we can hear about 500 tones. That's all we can do. Our hearing resolution is about quarter percent. So at 400 hertz, we can hear maybe 401, but we cannot hear 400 and a half. So that's the resolution of our hearing. Some of you probably remember Hoffnung. Hoffnung, the German English caricaturist that used to do a lot of work in music. I actually loved Hoffnung, but he died years ago. So music is really another language for us, an abstract language like maybe mathematics and some of the arts. Some people will tell you that painting is also a language, but unfortunately, we will not have time today to talk about it. But for me, the center of everything is language. The spoken language and the reading language is the instrument of our cognition. To me, thinking is actually speaking to ourselves. And language is very complicated. I actually, because I don't have a formal education in language, I spent about 2 years, which was part of the pleasure of writing the book, reading many books about language and understanding. This is a phenomenon that started about 70 to 100 years, 1,000 years back. Nobody knows exactly if it's genetic or behavior. It's very, very interesting, but not today. So music is the melody, the tune, the harmony, which is something that came, of course, later when we started to harmonize the music, and the rhythm. So in modernity, for example, rhythm is very important. You look at Stravinsky, for example, it's all the famous ballet are all rhythm. Probably started with folk songs, with lullabies, maybe rituals. We are probably religious now for about 50,000 years, so maybe that's one of the origins. So music created, we create music in a few ways. One is by singing. One is by plucking chords. All the string instruments, right? When you pluck a string or you bow a string and create vibration. Or wind instruments. So air through a flute or an oboe or a trumpet will create the sound. But if you look at the sound that we are creating, say from a violin, and I gave the picture here, it's not a single tone. So let's say that we are creating 200 hertz by playing the violin on the G string. And if you look at the spectrum of this tone, you will see what I show here on the plot. So there's 200, 400, 600, 800. Every 200 hertz, there's going to be a multiple. And in fact, the difference in sound between the different instruments is exactly this. Every instrument has a characteristic of harmonics. So the piano will look different from violin, and apparently the ear can very easily distinguish between them. So, and really, when you create a 400 hertz tone on an oboe, and you create a 400 tone on a piano, it's the same frequency, but they sound different. The first theory of music, of course, with the ancient Greeks, and Pythagoras, the man who gave us the first law of mathematics, was involved in this too. And Pythagoras noticed that if you take two strings and they have the same size, so 1 to 1, the sound when you plug them is the same. Really, they are consonant, they merge into one another. However, when he started to compare one of them to a smaller number, so the screen is going to be anywhere, right? I mean, you cut the screen at a point. He noticed that the sounds are merging. They are consonant only when the ratio between the two strings is a nice fraction. So, of course, he started with 1/2. So if one stream is generating 200 hertz, 1/2 will generate 400 hertz, and they converge, right? In the piano, if you play two octaves, like a C4 and C5, you can't hear that it's two tones if the piano is tuned well. So the octave, that is the octave, like the ratio of 2 to 1, and the octave became the central planning design of every musical system in the world. Because there are many, right? I mean, we are used to the Western system, but there are Indian and Chinese and South American, there are different systems. They are all using the octave because it's so natural. Then he started to notice that other nice fractions like 2/3, 3/4 are also sounding well, and we can understand it, right? If we take, for example, 2/3, which, you know, the inverse is 1.5, it means that if one string will create 200 hertz, then the second one will create 300 hertz, which is 1.5 times. And so the harmonic of the 300 hertz will be 600, 900, 1200, which is falling also on the harmonic of the 200. So these are consonant. Of course, the tone is different, and this is consonant. And in fact, the ratio 3 to 2, 1.5, is the central, I'm going to talk about it in a second, the central tenet of Western music. And that's how all the scales are being planned. So Pythagoras decided that they are going to divide the octave into 7 sections. And so this is the Pythagorean scale. It's a little bit coarse because at 1/7 you give up, think about it, you give up a lot. But later, the number 7 was probably picked because of 7 heavenly, or God knows, because Pythagoras was a philosopher much more than a musician or mathematician. Then the number 12 emerged as a compromise, because when you divide the octave by 12, you get more density, so you get more tones. Now, you know, how much can we divide it? I mean, can we divide it into 40? Yeah, we can. The problem is that the piano will have to be now the size of the room, because if this is C4 and this is C5, and there are 40 notes, imagine how big it will be. So 12 was a kind of a compromise, and I'd like to say a word about it in the next slide. So I mentioned that the Pythagorean system used fractions. And so when you tune the instrument based on fractions, every scale becomes very individual. It has its own shade. And that is not comfortable for orchestration, because suddenly C major and G major don't sound the same. They have their own characteristic. So instead, in the 17th, 18th century, they started to temper with the equal temper or well temper. If you, all of you probably know about Bach's famous piece, the well tempered clavier, where the distance between any two notes is a fixed ratio. So in our case, in 12, it's 5.9%. So between C and C sharp, 5.9%. Between C sharp and D, 5.9%. And that works much better in terms of making the scales very, very similar. And in terms of the tuning, you can see that if we would like this new tuning system to be also very close to fractions, we have to look for numbers that that mathematically give it to you. That's where the mathematics in music shows up. And you can see here, I gave you two tables of the 12 equal system, which we are using, and 41, which is a better system. But again, we cannot use 41 because the instruments will be huge. And you can see that, for example, the number, the seventh order, 2 to the power 7 over 12, is 1.498, which is very, very, very close to 1.5. And the same with other numbers. On the other hand, if you look at the 41 system, if we could use a 41 division system, then it will be even closer. But I don't think it matters much, because eventually no tuner is you can look at the table. You tune mostly by the ear, and if you bring a piano tuner home, you see what he's doing. They usually will tune C and then the fifth, and then the others, and that's by the ear. And but mathematically it has a meaning, and here is the famous circle of 5. So our scale, and that is really the equal temper system was established only toward the end of the 19th century, where the frequencies were noted, right? I mean, C, middle C is 440 hertz or 432 hertz. It keeps moving higher because they like the higher pitch. And the complete theory of the music scale is on this 5th chart. So for example, those of you who are not familiar, people who study music are usually familiar with this. If we start with C major, which is all the white keys only, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, si, do, and we move 7 semitones, which is the 5th, we go to G major, which is the next one on the right. And if we G major, we go again 7 semitone to the right, we get D major, and we get all the scales, all the way to C sharp major. And the same if we want to go to the left. So again, we go to the left, we go 7 semi, and of course now, instead of sharp that we had going right, we have flat when we go to left. I remember as a kid, I learned to play piano, and my teacher, for whatever reason, taught me only the going to the right. So I was maybe 9 years old, and the radio played Beethoven's 6th Symphony, and the announcer said, "This is Beethoven number 6 Symphony in F major." And I said, what is F major? I only knew about F sharp because I knew only the sharps. I didn't know the flats. So, but obviously you can play all the scales on the flats too. So that's a kind of a very important chart. Music theory is actually very complicated. What I gave you here is like a tiny, tiny bit, but it's very complicated, and things are not aligning 100%. When you go 7 times on the piano and you hit, from the lower C to the higher C, there is a tiny bit of a theoretical discrepancy, but not for today. So we said that early origins of music were, the primitive singing or playing a flute from a reed that you can cut. The Greek theater, apparently music was very important. And in fact, in the 19th century, people like Wagner, they thought that they are resurrecting that type of music that was very, very important, right? The chorus was part of the theater in Greece. We managed to decipher few Greek tones because they used to mark it, not like ours, but they used to mark it. They sound very strange. I listened to some of them. They're very strange, but 2,500 years ago, people were very different than today. In the Middle Ages, the Gregorian chants were established, and these were monophonic, usually not with no instrument accompanying, just singing. Very simplistic type of music that was for dedication and for discipline. In the High Middle Ages, now we're talking about 1200, 1300, music started to become a little bit more secular. The troubadour, very sexual type, a lot of love, and moving a little bit to polyphony. So we started to orchestrate more than just one tone. In the Renaissance, we already had the madrigal. Madrigal is, and in the Renaissance, you start to have, serious orchestration also. And Monteverdi.
Cut off. And this is a courtesy call to renew your warranty before we close the file. If you're interested in renewing your auto warranty now.
Sorry about that. Monteverdi, very great opera composer. He didn't write the first opera, but his L'Orfeo is performed until today. It sounds different, but worthy. If you like that stuff, still performed in Italy from time to time. And he wrote many. And Gesualdo is known because he was this nobleman and genius who caught his wife cheating and killed both of them. So he became, this criminal. But his music is very complex. In fact, some of the chords that he used have been used only later, like 300 years later. He was very, very sophisticated, worth listening. During the Baroque era, of course, Bach and Handel, the concerto was invented. So suddenly music became separated from voice. Remember that everything started with music accompanying the words, making the word, but the word was central to everything. Suddenly, in about 1670 or so, the concerto was born. Of course, the artists loved it very much because suddenly the music started to have a meaning by itself without the words. And very great music. Now, Bach and Handel, these are incomparable composers that wrote, very complicated pieces of music, no doubt. If you look at the passions and the cantatas, these are, very highly orchestrated, complex music, that are not easy to perform even today. So, of course, new instruments were invented also, and new forms of music, the cantata, the oratorio, evolutions of various instruments, the violins, the cremona families. The piano was kind of invented in the 1700s, but really became the piano that that we know today only in the 19th century. So the difference between the cembalo and the piano was the cembalo was a plucking instrument, and the piano has a very complex hammer action, which you can open your piano if you have one and take a look at it. the action can involve, 100 small pieces that make up every hammer of the piano. So the classical area, the fact is that during the classical era, there was a rise of the working, the middle class, because before that, everything was written for the kings and the noblemen. They paid for everything. And you look at Haydn, he wrote music to please the boss. And Mozart in certain ways was also very similarly, but because the crowd grew, now there was concert not only in palaces, but also in halls. Music had to, in certain ways in the beginning, to simplify a little bit, to make sure that the crowd can understand and absorb it. But later everything became, bigger and more complex. And in fact, Haydn really is the father of the symphony and the string quartet and the sonata, which are really very important genres in music today. So here's like a piece of a Gregorian chant from the 14th century. You can see there is no clef, there is no something like, sol or la clefs, or it's actually only a 4-line staff, not 5 like today. And you can see the words, right? The music is this small point, but the big letters are the words, because that's what's important at that time. So now we arrive at Beethoven, which is in music, not only music, but kind of my goal. I'll have to go a little bit faster now because I'm running out of time. But this to me was the gigantic cognitizer of music, because Beethoven, of course, could write the most beautiful tunes like anybody else, but that was not the purpose. The purpose was to develop the music, to write variations, to take tiny, tiny pieces of nothing and create this huge constructions. And that was something unique to him. Of course, his influence on the future of music was immense in such a way that I sometimes think that it was even negative, because composers look at his scores and what can we do? What can we do? I mean, after this, it's all perfect. So you all know I copied here the Fifth Symphony in the middle. Da, 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 da. That's it. These 4 tones are creating a movement of 10 minutes. And if you listen carefully, it doesn't stop. On the second movement, they show also. And the third movement, it shows also. And but it's hidden. It's much more complicated. You have to either read the music or listen carefully to where it is. But that was the man. It was, some people call him a pointillist, rather than big brushes, points that create. But this is fantastic. And the 9 symphonies, the 16 string quartet, nothing like that. The 16th string quartet, in my opinion, kind of finished the genre, because it's so monumental, especially the late quartet that are so modern and so complex. And then the 32 piano sonatas. So Melanie, so the second piece that I show is from the quartet number 7. So Beethoven wrote 6 quartets that were published in 1800, and they were very, I mean, they were Beethovenian, but they were very influenced by Mozart, Haydn. Some of them even copied structures. And then a few years later, he comes up with the Razumovsky Quartet 3 that was ordered by Count Razumovsky. And this is the first one. This is the second movement of the first Razumovsky, which I think is one of the most gigantic pieces of music was ever composed. And maybe Melanie can play it for us for a second. No, I'm sorry. I think we missed it. But anyways, if you look at the music, I'm sorry. If you look at the music, um, it starts with 15 same tones. Da da dan dan da da dan dan da 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 dan. These 15 same tones become the motto of a 10-minute music. And that's actually what's happening. Of course, it's convoluted, it's up and down in different shape and forms, back and forth. This is the whole 10 minutes of music. Nobody can do that. So now, everything becomes very mental, very cognitive, which you have to understand. Now, Beethoven was also a very great man, in my opinion, because he was the first artist that understood the value. He understood that, you're the nobleman because you were born noble, but I'm a genius. And that's how he treated everybody. This is a guy that could break a chair over the head of a patron. So, but of course, horrible life. I mean, was very sick, was a very sickly man, disaster, love life. And of course, you might know that in 1802, because of the deafness, he went to Heiligeland, which is the northern part of Vienna, and thought he's going to commit suicide. And he wrote the famous letter, the Heiligeland letter that he eventually didn't send to his brother. It was written to a brother about putting an end to his life. In fact, in that place, they have now a small monument that if you are Beethoven God, you go and see it like I did, and they have a facsimile of the original paper, and then somehow managed to come out of it. In 1803, he composed the Eroica and changed music forever. But Melanie, you will have to tell me when you want me to stop, because I need another like 10 minutes. Is that okay, or?
Go for it. 10 minutes.
Okay. So Beethoven actually started also the Romantic era, which was personal, passionate, spontaneous, and national. So Chopin, absolutely influenced by Polish music. Smetana, Brahms, or even Dvorak, all these people started to write national music. Mendelssohn, Liszt, Schumann were very great composers, but very much also, I think, on the shadow of Beethoven, because how can you write a symphony after this? So, as you know, Brahms wrote the first symphony when he was 50 years old, and was all his life kind of haunted by this genius. What can you do after he's done his work? And then we start to move more into modernity. So now Mahler and Schoenberg and Strauss, the music becomes very, very complex. The harmony or the melody becomes less and less important. It's all about harmony and structure. And the rise of the conductor, which I always doubt, but I guess when you have to manage a 100-person symphony and they're all prima donnas because their mother told them that they are geniuses, you have to have a person that is a despot. And so you have to remember that 200 years ago there was no conductor. The first violin gave the time, and that was it, more or less. But in the middle of the 19th century, with big operas and with big orchestra, that had to change. And today, the conductor is the king of the symphony. And you really, when you look at a performance, they give you the name of the conductor. It was an issue recently between Helen Grimaud and Abbado, who is not with us anymore. But Abbado, very powerful conductor. He wanted to perform with her Mozart Piano Concerto number 23 as the most beautiful music in the world. And she decided that she doesn't want to play the Mozart ending of it. And he canceled the recording because she wouldn't use the cadenza that he recommended. So it's incredible. Frankly, to end this story, Mozart piano concertos, you don't need a conductor. She went to the studio and she recorded it. It's available on YouTube, and it's, I mean, first of all, she's so beautiful, but then it's the most beautiful music, and it's a fantastic performance. And of course, the critique became, now it's all very mental, it's all analysis, and some of them became very, very powerful. In Vienna, there were people that were involved in the bloody murder between Brahms and Wagner. Some of you probably know the stories, and I'm not going to go. I wanted to say, of course, a word I have to say about Wagner. It's JCC, so a lot of Jewish people, I hope you're not going offended. This is very great music. I mean, to me, the great pieces of the 19th century are maybe Beethoven 9 and Tristan and Isolde. Tristan and Isolde is probably the greatest piece of music was ever written. So complex, so incredible. If you listen to the beginning, you will see that it's not easy to even identify the timing that he provides it. The whole piece, 5 hours, is musical sentences that never come to a conclusion. I mean, the music resolves in the last bar of the hours of 5 hours, so creating immense tension. Obviously, this is a different type of music, and Wagner really created modern music. Everybody was influenced by him. And I think that his music is fantastic. Of course, after I think Napoleon, he's the most written about person. He was a horrible person, no doubt, but we have to separate the art from the personality. And of course, his anti-Semitism was horrible. I mean, he wrote big articles of how horrible we are. And in Israel, you know, I heard first time Wagner in my life, I was 29 years old. But I immediately realized that this is wow. You have to separate the artist from the music. Tomasini ranked in his opinion, his readers, the 10 greatest composers, and he put Wagner after Verdi because Wagner was a terrible man. So we all have our own opinions and the way we go. So, okay, I think that I'm more or less done, and we can go to questions.
Does anybody have any questions? You can either raise your hand or put them in the chat.
You want me to stop the share, Melanie?
Yes.
Okay.
That way I can see everybody's faces if anybody's raising their hand. All right, I have a question. Let's see. How did you get interested in writing this book on so many topics? I could see that somebody would take one of these. In fact, your research for it was probably, you know, each individual topic. How did you decide to write a book about all of these complexities, for lack of a better word?
Well, well, you know, I think that I'm lucky to be interested in many things. So obviously technology, mathematics, but also in the humanists. So it made sense. Otherwise, you know, this would have been 18 volume. You're right. I mean, in many ways, almost everything that I touch in the book, it be music or architecture or the law, is very superficial because the book is already 120,000 words, and I was warned again and again, don't do more than 70,000. So look, I've written the book as vanity. I've written the book for myself more than anything else. Of course, I'd like a million people to read it. That's a different story. But I think it's a fantastic adventure. So, and I recommend everybody that is ready to put the effort into it. No, it's a fantastic adventure to write a book like this. It requires a lot of studying, a lot of reading, and things like that. But so there are things that I didn't put inside. For example, I should have put education, and I didn't. Right? I'm considering in the second edition of the book.
Just going to ask if this book too.
The subtitle to be, all the importance of education, because really what this book says is, look, the world is going mental, and you have to learn. You have to learn to learn, and you have to learn to love it, and you have to learn on your life. You can't do any more a degree in university. It's not good because everything is changing, and they're talking about young people who have to go to 3-4 careers in the future. We were lucky. I went through one career. But eventually it bored me, so I went into music and history.
Well, we look forward to book number 2 coming out. Have you written anything else? Is there anything else published?
That takes a long time. Writing is easy. The thing is editing. Editing takes forever. In fact, I always ask myself, how does anybody finish a symphony? How does anybody finish a painting? So my son was in school here in Claremont, and I used to talk to him about it. That was 20 years ago. And he had one of the teachers, that guy that published like 20 books, and he asked him, how do you decide to finish the book? And the guy said, very good question. You finish it when you can't look at it anymore. And I know it's true for me, because after so much editing, so many times reading, you can't look at it anymore. You're finished.
There's another question. Kathy, did you have your hand up real quick?
Well, I was just wondering what the topic of your next book would be.
I don't know. It probably has to do, look, it's not going to be, I will never write this book again. I don't think that I have the energy. This was a huge project. So what I'm writing now, because I'll never stop writing, what I'm writing now has to do with crisis, with panic, with hysteria, and COVID, because I think that the world responded to COVID in a dismal manner. There was no reason to lock down everything. We knew very quickly that it's not going to kill 5% of us. If you remember, last February, a year ago, they talked about 3 to 5%, so 10 to 15 million people dead in the United States. No, it's not. We knew it very quickly. And we know that the old people die from it, not the young. It's kind of a good virus. So we could do much, much better. And the question is, what are we going to learn from this? Because I have a feeling that when the real thing happens, when the thing that killed 3 to 5%, we're going to lose it all. So, but there's been a lot of hysteria in the history before. It's not the first time. So I'm looking for similar events in history, like the Black Plague, things like that. But who knows?
Very interesting. Well, we'd love to hear it when you have it. I put in the chat the website, themindismightier.com, so you can take a look at Bar-Giora's website about it. I also put in the link to the musical piece, the Beethoven, that I was trying to play, that when we practiced, I guess I let it go too far.
No, what happened? I gave you the link, and the link starts at the beginning.
So I put it in the chat.
This is the second movement. So
okay. Well, thank you so much, Bar-Giora. I have a few quick announcements real quick about some upcoming events you may have read about in our monthly senior email blast.
Terrific.
Our next monthly senior virtual lounge, Meet Me in the Lounge online, will be this Friday at 10. We're having a Middle East update with Mark Silverstein, who'll be zooming in from Israel on Thursday, April 22nd at 10 a.m. Our monthly JCC Social Circles movie discussion is Tuesday, April 27th at 3:30. We'll be discussing a film from 2011 called A Separation. It's available for viewing prior to the meeting on Prime Video and some other streaming services. We hope you'll join us for Connect with Shabbat on Friday evening, April 30th at 6 p.m. Last but not least, our final event of the season for Jewish poets, Jewish Voices, will be on Tuesday, May 4th at 7 p.m., where we will hear works from 2 Israeli Jewish poets of the past. More information can be found on our website at lfjcc.org. I'll put that in the chat, and on our senior page. And you can email me. I'll be happy to send you the registration links. And we so appreciate Bar-Giora today for sharing all this information with us. So thank you so much. And
thank you. It's really terrific. You're very special.
oh, thank you. I just put I put WW. There's usually 3 W's, but lfjcc.org for more information about our upcoming events to the JCC. A lot of different things coming up. So thank you for your time today, and lehitraot.